In this tutorial, we're going to build this really cool action button here. It's using a liquid effect when the elements touch each other. By now, you've probably seen the new dynamic island on the iPhone 14. So we have the GUI effect, the blur effects, and a lot of really cool animations. So we're going to learn how to achieve that and also use Motion Manager to detect the physical device orientation and apply some reflections. So to achieve that, we're going to use the canvas and we're going to customize the elements using masking and apply the material sheet, the shadows, the scale effect, the circles, as well as the blur. So let's get started. We're going to go back to Xcode and we'll create a new file, SwiftUI view, called action button view, and then create. Now here we're going to save time and start with just setting the background UI, which is called UI1. Let's make this resizable and aspect ratio, content mode fill. Also, we're gonna make the corner radius to 50. Then let's put this in a Z stack and apply a background that is black. Then ignore save area. So the focus is on the action button. As for the rest of the UI, feel free to try to recreate that yourself as practice. The layers are all in Figma and it should be pretty straightforward. Now I'm going to show you how to use Canvas. You can treat it as its own asset, meaning that you have your own space where you can draw elements in its own way and apply effects with properties and filters that only exist in Canvas. So let's start by setting canvas, curly braces, and here we're going to receive two things. One, the context, and second, the size, in. Now the context allows us to draw elements inside the canvas, and the size gives us the dimension of the whole canvas. Let's start by drawing something. We're going to set context and then fill if we want to create a shape. In this case, it's going to want to have a path. So path, parentheses, ellipsis in, and using cdirect, I'm going to set the XY position as well as the width and height. So let's start with the basics, 0, 0, width 56 and height 56. Then for the width property, we're going to set the color itself. So color, and then inside parentheses, we can set a color. I'm going to use white. Let me maximize the coding space a little bit. And here you can see that I drew the circle that starts at 0, 0 position. And notice that Canvas is taking the full size of the Z stack. So it's similar to a shape which tends to take the maximum space. And in fact, if I set the width to size dot width, you're going to see that it's taking the full width. Let me put it back to 56. Also, I could have set a background to blue, and you can see this is the background of the canvas. But I'm not going to have a background. I want to set it so the circle is at the bottom right, which means that I'm going to use size.width for the X position minus 72 because it started here, and I'm going to push it back by 72. And likewise for the Y position, size.height minus 70. Now what if I want to customize all the drawings that happen inside the canvas? Notice that my context here doesn't necessarily accept something like background with regular material sheet or the path neither. So what I need to do is to be a bit clever here. I'm going to use the canvas as a mask to a shape. So in order to do that, I'm going to put my canvas inside its own code section, var canvas of type SumView, curly braces, and paste canvas inside. And then I'm going to create a rectangle parentheses. This is going to use a fill that can accept a material. Then I'm going to use the mask modifier with canvas. So you can see that my canvas is now a mask meaning that it's going to use whatever properties that the rectangle has. Right now it's not very obvious because we have regular material, but I can also use ultra thin, and I can also set preferred color scheme to dark. As a result, whatever color that I apply in my canvas doesn't really matter. So if I set it to black, it's not going to change anything because it's simply used as a mask. What's interesting is that I can add more properties such as an overlay and set a rectangle with a fill of black with opacity 0.5, and go at the end, set the blending mode of the whole rectangle to overlay. And of course, I can use drop shadows. So I'm going to set a shadow with a radius of 0, x minus 1, and y minus 1. Also, before the radius, I'm going to set the color to dot white, opacity 0.2. Let me copy this shadow and paste it to set a black drop shadow with the same radius and x1 as well as y1. Finally, we're going to set another one, black 0.5, radius 10, x 10, and y 10 as well. Then we can add an offset symbol using overlay, and here I'm going to set image using system name plus. Let me make this bigger by using font to system using a size of 30. Let me just specify a foreground color so that it's always the same regardless of the light mode and dark mode. I'm going to set it to white, and I want to align this to the bottom right, which means that I'm going to set a frame using a max width infinity, then max height infinity, alignment to bottom trailing. Now I just need to align this using offset to be in the center of the circle. Let me just use offset x minus 28, y minus 28. Finally, I just want to move this a little bit above the home indicator. So I'm going to use offset with a y of minus 29. And that's it. We have the basic UI for the action button. We've used canvas to draw a shape, and then we used it as a mask so that we can apply some of the same properties that are available for the normal shape in SwiftUI. Now in the next section, I want to show you how we can use canvas to apply its unique filters, but also how to create multiple symbols inside canvas. So I'll see you in the next section. In this section, we're going to learn how to use canvas to apply multiple symbols and also use the filters so that we can have this awesome liquid effect as the shapes get next to each other. Now we're going to go back to the canvas, and so far we have only created a single shape. If you want to create multiple ones, you're going to set symbols, and then from here we can draw the shapes the same way as in SwiftUI. So circle, parentheses, then I'm going to set a frame width to 76, and the important part is to set a tag modifier for each of the elements that you're drawing. So the first circle is going to be tag 1, then I'm going to create another circle with the same width of 76, and this time set a tag of 2. Then I'm going to use offset with x to minus 50. Now so far we're not drawing the symbols, we're just using a context fill. In order to draw the symbols, we're going to need to set dot draw instead. And here we're going to set image at, and we're going to need a graphics context result image. So what this means is that we can use context.result symbol using the ID, and in this case it's going to be 1. Now this element here is not optional, so we have to set an exclamation point to force it, but it can lead to crash if the element does not exist. So for example, if I set it to 3, it's going to crash the app. Now another way to make it safe is to use optional binding. So what this means is that we're going to set a condition that says if let symbol is equal to context.resolved symbol to 1, curly braces, then we're going to run this code right here. Now at the same time, we're also declaring that symbol, so we can automatically use that symbol right away. In other words, I can only use this symbol that I declared if that symbol exists. So if I set it to 3 and 3 does not exist, then this code is not going to run, which is going to prevent a crash. Now for my first symbol, I'm going to set at CG point X and Y, X to size.width minus 44, Y to size.height minus 44. Awesome. Now you can see that the circle is drawn using the symbols that I declared after and tagging them with a number. Now I want to draw multiple symbols, so I'm going to use a loop. And that loop, I need the index, which I'm going to use for the ID value. So for index in 1 ... 2 braces, then I'm going to put the if statement inside. I'm going to use the index value instead of 1. And boom, we have both symbols drawn next to each other. Okay, now we're going to use the canvas filters. To do that, still inside canvas, we're going to set context.add_filter, and here we have a bunch of them, such as blur. So the blur radius, I'm going to start with 10, and it is working. Now remember that we're trying to use the liquid effect. And in order to do that, we're going to have to combine both the blur and another filter that we call alpha threshold. So before the first blur filter, I'm going to set context.add_filter.alpha threshold, then set the minimum to 0.8. But it's still not working. In order to do that, we're going to need to use context.drawLayer. Then for the content, press enter. We're going to receive CTX in for context. We don't want to repeat the same value as context. Then inside the draw layer, we're going to move the loop there. Now it's going to crash because we're still using context for drawing. And since we're inside the draw layer, we're going to need to use the other context value, so CTX here. So remember about crashing. If let's say the symbol doesn't exist, you're going to get a warning. You're going to have to press OK and resume the preview. And voila, you can see that now I'm inside draw layer and my alpha threshold is working, giving this awesome liquid effect when two shapes are merged using blur. And scrolling down a little bit, we can definitely move to see how it looks like as the shapes move next to each other. All right, before we go, we're going to set a simple tap gesture so that we can expand the action button. We're also going to draw 2 more circles. First, let me set the state. At the very top, I'm going to set at state var show is equal to false. Then on the rectangle, after offset, I'm going to set on tap gesture, then use with animation so that it has a transition. And in this case, I'm going to use spring with a response value of 0.8 and a damping fraction of 0.6. Then wrap this and set show.toggle. Now that my animation states are set, I'm going to set the condition of show ? Then set it to -100, otherwise 0. So let's witness the magic. I'm going to press here and it does this awesome liquid animation with the spring timing. Let me create more circles. So copy and paste 2 times, set the tag to 3 and then 4. For the third one, I'm going to set the Y, and the fourth, I'm going to set X and Y. This time -84, and set the Y to show ? -84, otherwise 0. Now make sure that you're going to set the loop to 1 to 4 because we have 4 elements, and boom, we have our beautiful action button animation. And on top of that, we're using optional binding so that if we have something like to 10, it's not going to crash our app if the symbol does not exist. Let me put it to 5 because at the end of the tutorial, we're going to have another shape. In the next section, we're going to apply circles animation and blur animation as well as the icons on these 3 circles. So I'll see you in the next section. In this section, we're going to add the rest of the animations as well as circles and a drag gesture at the end. Now let's start with the icons. So right now we have the plus icon, and since we're going to have multiple ones, we're going to put this inside a code section called icons. Let me just fix the spacing and then create var icons of type SumView, then paste the image. I'm going to put this inside a Z stack, and then I'm going to add more images. So the next one is going to be image system name bubble.left.fill. Now you can see that it's starting from the center, which means that I can essentially stretch the whole width and height for the Z stack instead of just the first image. So let me just move the frame to the Z stack. Likewise, for the foreground color, I'm going to apply to all of the images. For the second one, we're going to set an offset of x minus 28 and y minus 129. Now we're going to test this to make sure that it's well aligned within the circle, and we're going to do the rest by copying and pasting the second one 2 times. Now I'm going to change the system name for the third one to moon.fill, then x minus 128 and y minus 29. Finally, we have the fourth one, which is quote opening x minus 113 and y minus 114. So let's make sure that they're all aligned, and we're going to hide them when we're not expanded. So let's do that. But here we want to have a different animation for these 3 icons versus the main plus icon. So I'm going to command click on the first one and set that inside a group, move the rest inside as well. Let's start with a simple opacity animation, show $1, otherwise 0. Then it's just going to fade in and fade out. So as you notice with the dynamic island, they like to add blur to make it more interesting by adding depth. So we're going to add blur and set show $0, otherwise 10. So this adds the depth. And finally, we can add movement by using a scale effect on the whole group. So I'm going to use scale effect, show $1, otherwise 0.5. And this is exactly what I'm looking for. What's cool is that every icon is moving towards the main icon, following the bubble, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. Another thing that we can do is to make sure that the plus icon turns into a close icon. And this is fairly simple with a plus symbol. We can simply use a rotation effect on the symbol. So here I'm going to use degrees and show $45, otherwise 0. Now you're kind of noticing that it's off center, which means that we should move the rotation effect before the offset. So this can definitely mess up the rotation animation. So let's give it a try, and that looks great. Next, I'm going to add multiple circles surrounding the action button, and it's going to make the animation even more unique. Let's scroll up a little bit. I'm going to put that right after overlay icons, and I'm going to use a background, then circle, parentheses, dot stroke. I don't need the style because I'm going to use the default. Then I will set a gradient using the fill modifier, dot linear gradient using colors. For the colors, I'm going to set dot white, dot opacity 0.5, then dot clear. Start point top leading, end point bottom trailing. Now this circle here, I'm going to use multiple times. So I'm going to create its own section, cut this, call it circle. Then I'll create var circle of type SumView, then paste the circle. Let's organize the background. Let's set the width to 208. Then using overlay, I'll create another circle with a width of 60. Let's copy this, and by the way, you can use Command D to duplicate So in this case, if you duplicate from here, it's going to add next to it. But if you add the spacing from the line before, then it's going to add to a different line. Now, the third one is going to have a width of 80. And I'm going to move the whole thing to the bottom right, which means that I'm going to use a frame with a max width of infinity, max height infinity, alignment bottom trailing. All that's left is before that frame, I'm going to set offset x 60 and y 60. My goal is to make sure that it starts from the action button. Cool, so let's use the same effects as before, starting with opacity, show $1, otherwise 0. I'm not going to use blur for this one, so I'll go straight to scale effect, show $1, otherwise 0.8. Let's take a look. It seems that the circle is moving at the same time. One thing I can do is for the scale effect, you can use anchor to bottom trailing. And this happens to fix our problem. Now, one thing you're noticing also is that it's using the spring animation, which sometimes you want to have a separate animation for specific elements. And in this case, we can use the animation modifier to customize that. In this case, I'm going to use ease out with a duration of 0.3, and the value change is the show state. Now, thanks to that, you can see that there's no bouncing on the circle. Awesome. Before we go, we're going to have some fun with the drag animation, especially with the liquid effect. I think it's fun. Of course, it's optional, and there's no real utility to it, except that it's an Easter egg and people can have fun with it. So let's set a drag gesture, starting with the state of our translation of type CG size is equal to .0. Then I'll create my drag gesture. So var drag of type sum gesture, drag gesture, parentheses, set the events, starting with unchanged, press enter, value in, then translation is equal to value.translation. Then on release, we're going to use unended, press enter, value in. I'm going to start with the animation that I want, and this time using interactive spring with a response of 0.6 and damping fraction 0.7, as well as blend duration 0.7. Curly braces, then reset the translation is equal to 0. So interactive spring is something that is convenient, especially for interactive elements that is using a drag gesture. You can definitely play with the values until it feels right, but it's very similar to the spring animation. All right, let's apply this drag gesture right after on-tap gesture. I'm going to use gesture, then drag. So the final step is to apply the offset to an element. And in this case, we're going to create a fifth circle. To save time, I'm going to copy the fourth circle and set the tag to 5. And instead of offset with X and Y, I'm going to use translation. And boom, we have our nice liquid effect that we can drag around to have the awesome synergy between the other circles. Now, before we go, we can definitely apply a scale effect on the main screen. And that is super easy to do, especially when you have control of the background UI, for example. So on the image, I can just add a scale effect using show 0.95, otherwise 1. Since we already have the corner radius as well as the black background, it's going to have a very nice transition, giving focus to the action button when it's expanded. So I hope you're having fun, and of course you can add a lot more effects and tweak the settings. In this case, I added blur and it creates a really cool focus. So definitely don't hesitate to apply this to your own UI and play with the values. In the next section, I want to show you how to use the motion manager to detect the physical rotation of the device and then apply the reflections on the background UI. So I'll see you in the next section. In this section, we're going to explore the CM Motion Manager, which allows us to use the device sensors such as the gyroscope and the accelerometer. Now we're going to use CM Motion Manager, and then we're going to observe the value changes, then apply to the UI. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a new Swift file called Motion Manager. Then here, I'm going to import core motion. Then I'll create a class Motion Manager of type observable object so that we can listen to the changes in real time. And we're going to publish a bunch of values, starting with publish var pitch of type double and set a 0.0 for the default value. Then Command D twice. Now I'll set roll as well as rotation. So the framework that I'm going to use is the CM Motion Manager. Let's start by declaring var motion of type CM Motion Manager. Then I'll initialize, so init parentheses curly braces. Motion is equal to CM Motion Manager parentheses. Now from here, we're going to be able to access the different sensors. Next, set motion.device motion update interval is equal to 1 divided by 60. So this is the interval for updating the values. And then I'll set motion.startDevice motion updates to with handler. To is going to be .main, and handler, just press enter. We're going to receive some value such as motion data and then error. Now often when you're dealing with dynamic values or API calls, you want to make sure that there are no errors, and to stop the code if there are errors to prevent crashes. In this case, we can use guard error, make sure that it's equal to nil, otherwise, so else, curly braces, then return inside the curly braces. So the guard statement is very similar to the if statement, except that you don't have to run your code inside the curly braces, so you can avoid having so many nested conditions. So what this means is that it's not going to run the code afterwards if it doesn't fit that condition. Next, I'm going to set if let motion data is equal to motion data curly braces. Now the motion data that I'm receiving, I want to make sure that it's not optional, and I will only run this code if the motion data is not empty. Finally, we can update the publish values by setting self.pitch is equal to motion data dot attitude dot pitch. Then self.roll is equal to motion data dot attitude dot roll. Finally, self.rotation is equal to motion data dot rotation rate dot x. Keep in mind that all of these values are up to you, what you want to publish and what you want to use for your UI. But the most important to understand is that we're using the CM Motion Manager, we're configuring it, and then we're receiving the values, which is the motion data, and we want to make sure that there's no error, and also, since it's not optional, that it exists, and therefore we can publish those values here. As a result, I can go back to my action button view at observed object var manager is equal to motion manager parentheses. So this is my motion manager that I just created, and I'm declaring it as manager so that I can use it. All right, so we're going to go to the image and we're going to apply that before the corner radius. Let me start with an overlay parentheses, and I'll set a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 50. Then set a stroke, and instead of the style, I'm going to set .linear gradient using colors. Now the first color is going to be .white .opacity 0.2, second color .white .opacity 0.5, and third is going to be clear. Start point top leading, and end point, this is where I can use the motion manager. Unit point X manager.roll and Y manager.roll as well. So at this point, you can only test on your device. You're going to need to select your iPhone, if it's connected via USB, and set your Apple account to make sure that you have the correct permissions, and then run. Now there is one step that we need to fix, which is to go to Content View and set the new screens to be accessible, including the Action button. So for Action button, I'm going to use Action button view, parentheses. Then while I'm here for the card, I'm going to use Card reflection view, as well as radial layout view. So if you run this, and in my case, I'm using QuickTime to be able to preview from my phone, you can see that when I move my phone, the reflection on the outline is also moving, which is super neat. So going back to Xcode, to the Action button view, I'm going to fix a few things. First, I'm going to add +1 to make sure that we have a default value. Otherwise, sometimes we do not see part of the outline. I'm going to do for both X and Y. Second, I can customize the speed by multiplying by 5 for both. And third, I can make sure that this value is always positive. So I set ABS, then do that for Y as well. Also, it is recommended to set overlay after corner radius, otherwise it might be cropped. Then I want to move the whole rounded rectangle to be its own code section. I'm going to name this motion, then scroll down, set var motion of type SumView, then paste that. Then I will add a reflection to the whole card, which means that I need to embed this inside a Z stack. Let's use linear gradient using colors. I will set first color dot clear, second color white dot opacity 0.5, and then third clear as well. Start point top leading. Then for the end point, I can copy the same unit point value. Just make sure that you're using the first parentheses and have 2 at the end. Then paste that. Now for the linear gradient, I'm going to set to multiply by 10 instead. Then finally, we don't want to show these reflections by default, only when we expand the Action button. So I'm going to set opacity show $1, otherwise 0. Now I'm just missing the corner radius for the linear gradient, so I'm going to add that corner radius to 50. Awesome. So if you find that this color is a little bit too grayish, we can definitely add a blending mode. And let me just add another linear gradient. For the color, I'm going to use color literal. So pound color literal parentheses, and I can set to, let's say, purple, start point top leading, then bottom trailing. And for this linear gradient, I can set a blend mode to soft light. Let's test it. We have a slight tint of purple, and we can also test on the device. As we open the Action button, now the reflections are also moving based on the physical rotation. You can definitely play with the different motion manager values such as pitch, roll, and rotation to see what works best for your UI, and you can play with the speed, the gradient colors, and so much more. So I hope you learned a lot and you're having fun with the Action button, the liquid effect, the reflections, and the motion manager. Thanks for taking the course this far. In the next section, we're going to create the Compass UI. This is going to be an exciting one, so I'll see you in the next section. In this series of videos, we're going to learn this fully functional Compass app that uses Motion Manager to detect the compass direction, the location, and will add neat interactions such as this flashlight here based on where you drag. Then there are small details such as this circular text, and we'll build this beautiful tooltip interaction and animation, as well as a custom modal for the compass sheet where you can drag and dismiss using a 3D perspective. So there are a lot of details, and this design is definitely inspired by the Compass app on the Apple Watch Ultra. The design itself is already prepared in Figma, so you can always reference and see what we're trying to build. And it's really helpful if you want to follow and take it further beyond this course. Now let's start with the basic UI, and in Xcode, we're going to create a new file called compass view. Let's start with the background, and I'm gonna get this blue color here using the hex value, and I'm gonna create a radial gradient. Then use the colors, and here I'm gonna set the array. First color, set color literal, then open the color picker, and using the RGB sliders, I'm gonna paste the hex value. Then the second color is going to be black. Center, center, start radius 1 and end radius 400. This is going to be ignoring the save area. Next, we'll design these 3 strokes, and it's basically 3 circles that is using different dash lines and using the same gradient. So I'm going to create a reusable gradient. Let's set var gradient of type linear gradient, curly braces, then linear gradient using colors. And again, I'm going to use color literal. So color literal, parentheses, set the color picker, and using RGB slider, hex color, and then paste that. Then second color to black again, start point top leading, bottom trailing. Now let's set the outlines. First, embed this inside a Z-stack, and right above it, I'm gonna set a circle using a stroke border. And before setting the style, I'm going to set the gradient. Then for the style, press enter, parentheses, let's set the line width to 5, and the dash, which is going to be an array, I'm gonna set 1, 1. I'll need 2 more of these circles, so let's Command D to duplicate. The second one is going to be 10, 1, 6, then 15, 1, 62. And there you have it. It looks very similar to what we have in the design. Then we're gonna put these circles together inside a Z-stack, and just for these circles, I'm gonna set the frame width to 315. Now for this UI, we're gonna have many parts, so it's useful to set into different components and use the body to have an overview of the entire structure, which means that this Z-stack right here, I'm gonna name this as strokes. Let me create it, var strokes of type SumView, and then paste the Z-stack there. And likewise for the background, I'm gonna name this background and set var background of type SumView, then put the radial gradient there. Next, we're gonna take care of these outer circles. I'm gonna put this below the strokes and name this outer circles, then create the component, so outer circles of type SumView, then start with circle, foreground style, use linear gradient with colors, and it's going to be from black, comma, and then clear. Then top leading, bottom trailing. Now this is for the background. I'm also going to add an inner shadow on top of the linear gradient. So shadow dot inner. Then I'll set the X to 0.5 and Y 0.5. The reason why I'm doing this is to make the outline even thinner, because remember that one point in iOS is going to scale to roughly 3 pixels on an actual device because the resolution is at 3x. So sometimes you can get away with decimals, especially at 0.5, to get a much thinner line. So before the radius, I'm gonna set the color to white.opacity 0.5. Now to see the difference, if I put it to 1 and 1, you're gonna see that the line is much thicker. So putting back to 0.5 makes it thinner, especially if you intend to scale up, for example. Now let me put this circle inside a Z-stack. Then I want to make it bigger beyond the bounds of the screen. So I'm going to set a scale effect to 1.2. Also, because this is a circle and it's going to use the maximum space based on what we have in the screen, this is great for making your UI adaptive. You still want to set a max size. Otherwise, if your screen is really big, such as for the Macs or the iPad, you can see that we have a much bigger gap. So you want to set a frame using a width of 393 and this will serve as the boundaries. Great, I want to use a second circle with exactly the same values. So let's name this outer circle, and keeping the scale customizable, let me create the other component, so outer circle of type SumView, then paste that circle. Then duplicate this circle and set the scale to 1.5. So this part is a little bit dark. Let me just set the opacity for the first color to 0.5 instead. Much better. Next, we're going to take care of the inner circle. So we have multiple parts, and we're basically using roughly the same techniques for different areas, such as a darker, lighter, middle, as well as the white circle. Now you can try to build this yourself by referencing from the Figma file, or you can directly take the code from the text content or the Xcode project. Essentially, we have the inner circle, and we have multiple ones because they have different colors, different inner shadow or drop shadow. Some of them are more repetitive, such as the number 4, and number 5 is the white circle in the middle. So let's include that above the outer circle. I'm going to set inner circles. And there you go, we have the beautiful middle section. And here I'm using padding in addition to the maximum size, which is a circle, to set the gap between the elements. So as you can see, we're using 3 different techniques that can set the size of elements, including using the scale, using a fixed size, or using a padding, and a combination of all 3 depending on the situation. But the styling of all of these circles are very similar, and this is really good practice for you trying to do it yourself by referencing the Figma file. Lastly, we're going to use a new technique for this beautiful light here. So let's go back to the body, and I'm going to set a light component, then declare var light of type SumView, starting again with a circle. On the circle, I'm going to set a stroke using a white color to make it a lot more obvious. Now the special technique here is to set the style using stroke style with a line width of 200. Right now it looks like a giant stroke, but what if we do trim using from 0.6 and to 0.9? So that gives us a portion of the circle that otherwise, if we didn't use stroke, it would look something like this. And that's not exactly what we want. And additionally, if you set the frame size using a width of 200, you can see that we have that exact shape of the light. And we could only achieve this by using the line width of a stroke. And all that's left now is to set the radial gradient instead of the white color, setting to colors, then white opacity 0.2 to clear, then center, start radius 0 and radius 200. And boom, we have our beautiful light. So this is the basic layout for the Compass app. Next, we're going to take care of the circular text, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a clever way. So I'll see you in the next section. In this section, I'm going to show you how to create this beautiful circular text in Xcode by turning this text variable into an array so that we can loop and create this circular text using a very clever rotation technique in SwiftUI. Back in Xcode, we're going to create a new SwiftUI file. It's going to be called circle label view, then create. Let's start with a simple text variable. So var text is equal to latitude. Then we're going to turn this into uppercase. Now we're going to try to loop through this variable. So first, I'm going to repeat from the text. Then we'll turn that text into an array. So text.enumerated first. Then I'll set that as an array. So parentheses, then array. Using this technique, we're also going to get the index value. So I need to set id / offset. Then we'll put index, comma, and we're going to name this one letter because each of the item that we receive is going to be a letter of this array. All right, so let's apply the letter to the text. So we're going to set letter. Then we'll set this as a string, otherwise it's going to complain. Now here's the magic. I'm going to embed this inside a VStack, and you're going to see that the letters are spread vertically now. And I can change that from VStack to HStack if I want to do so horizontally. I can also set that to a Z-stack, and it's going to stack on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is to put each letter into a V-stack. Then I'm going to add a rotation effect on the V-stack using degrees. And for the number, I'm going to use 5 multiplied by index. Here, it's going to complain about the index not being a double. So I'm going to turn the index value into a double. You can see the letters are rotating, but there's no real space between each of them. So what I'm going to do is to add a spacer for my VStack, and boom, I have my circular text. Let me put the frame size on the Z-stack to a width of 300 and a height of 300. Depending on the fonts that you're using, the letters may not have the same width, which is why we have this kerning issue. Now, there are fonts that have the same width, and for San Francisco, it's called SF Mono. Let's set the font to .system using the size of 13, design monospace. This is the SF Mono, and also we're gonna set a bold. So from here, I'm going to use the full text, and you can find that in the text content. Let me change the text, and you can see that it overlaps a little bit. So what you can do is to adjust the number that multiplies the index value. So I can try 4.9, and that's roughly what I want. Now, it's definitely a good idea to set those as variable, including the text itself, so that we can customize as a component. So var text width of type double is equal to 4.9 by default. I'm also going to set the size of the circle, var diameter of type double, set that to 300. With this, let's replace the values. I'm going to start here, which is text width, and also here, which is diameter, for both of those values, so width and height. Now, using this component, I'm going to go back to circle view, and right after inner circle, I'm going to set circle label and create the component for it, var circle label of type sum view, circle label view, parentheses. Let me make it more visible by using foreground color to white. And it's a little bit too big, so I'm going to set the diameter to 225. Perfect. And that's it. That's how you create a customizable circular text by using a text variable, turning that into an array, loop that, use a VStack, add a spacer, and then rotate, which I think is pretty clever. So in the next section, we're going to create the awesome flashlight feature by using the drag gesture. So I'll see you in the next section. In this section, I'm going to show you how to build this beautiful flashlight feature using the drag gesture. Normally, when we use the drag gesture, we use the CG size to store the state. And that's because we don't really care about the touch position. So the CG size value always starts at the middle of the screen, where the CG point starts exactly where your touch position is. Now let's put this into practice. So I'm going to set the state var location of type CG point this time is equal to 0 by default. Then we're going to set the drag gesture. So var drag of type sum gesture, curly braces, drag gesture, parentheses, then set on change, enter value in. We're going to store that location using value.location. Let's attach this gesture to the entire screen, which is on the Z-stack. So gesture, drag. All right, now we're going to create the flashlight. So we're going to put that right after inner circles, flashlight, then create the component for it, var flashlight of type SumView, then start with a circle. This circle will have an offset using x location.x and y using location.y. Let's add a fill before the offset using white to make it more obvious. So let's start with the demo. If I start dragging from the middle, it starts from the bottom right, but if I start from the top, it starts in the middle. I'm going to switch to the CG size value, and in this case, I'm going to have to use translation and switch between X to width to Y using height. Now, if I start dragging, no matter what, it always starts from the middle, regardless of where I start. So this is great for dragging an entire screen, but it's not great for following the flashlight position, for example. So let me put it back to CG point, because that's what we're going to use, using location. However, we are running into a problem, meaning that it's not exactly at the position of the touch. So we need to set some sort of an offset, and that offset depends on the size of the element. Since that size depends on the size of the screen, I'm going to use Geometry Reader. So embed Geometry Reader, then proxy in. Unfortunately, Geometry Reader tends to move the elements and start at the position from the top left, which can be a problem. To fix that, we're going to set the container frame, and in this case, I'm going to set this circle into a Z stack, and I'm going to set frame using width proxy.frame in.global, and then using the width. I'm going to do the same for the height. So, comma, height proxy.frame in global dot height. And that goes back to the middle position. So now, using the size, I can essentially set minus proxy.size.width divided by 2. Then for the Y position, minus proxy.size.height divided by 2. Thanks to this, now when I drag, I get exactly the center position of the circle. And that's going to be useful for the flashlight. Great, now we can set the radial gradient instead of the white color. I'm going to use with colors, and I'm going to start with .white.opacity 0.1, comma, .clear. Then center, start radius 0, and end radius 200. Now I have my beautiful flashlight. Next, we want to make sure that only when we start dragging that the flashlight appears, and likewise when we finish dragging, then it disappears. To do that, I'll set a new state. State var is dragging is equal to false by default. Let's go to the drag gesture, and this is where we're going to change the boolean during unchanged. So is dragging is equal to true, and then we're going to set unended value in. When we're done with animation, is dragging is equal to false. With this, we're going to go back to the circle, and we're going to add .opacity is dragging question mark to 1, otherwise 0. And that's it. That's how you create an awesome flashlight gesture in SwiftUI. Now you can of course change the opacity of the flashlight by making it more obvious or less obvious. In the next section, we're going to add masking to the flashlight so that we can have the lines and also some hidden elements in your UI which can make your interactions even more interesting. So I'll see you in the next section. Masking is a really powerful technique in SwiftUI. In fact, you can pretty much mask anything, including the camera or really large groups of elements. And in this session, we're going to learn how to combine that with the drag gesture using the flashlight. And also we're going to have these beautiful hidden elements that we can use with the masking. So let's go back to the flashlight. This is where we have our circle, and this is what allows us, combining with the drag, to have this beautiful flashlight. Now, oftentimes masking is combined with the existing elements. So in this case, we have this flashlight, and we can essentially duplicate the entire thing to have a second light, and at this point is going to combine the both of them. And also I'm going to remove the opacity, which means that it's going to be a lot more obvious. Now this is going to be great when I'm going to use the masking on those specific shapes and elements. So let's do that. We're going to have mask, and then here set a circle using stroke, and voila, that's it. That's all we needed to do to get that masking on the line. Gives this really nice shine effect. And now we're going to add more of these circles. As always, in order to have multiple elements, we need a container. So we're going to embed that inside a Z-stack. And then we're going to set a scale effect using pretty much the same values as the different circles that we have here. So this one is 1.2. Then Command D, this one is 1.5. Command D again, I'm going to use padding this time with a padding of 20. Then duplicate 5 more times. This is 80, 100, 120, 145, and then 170. Also, we need to set the frame using a width of 393. Great, now the flashlight applies to exactly the same lines that we have in the user interface. Now we're going to add these hidden texts next to the waypoints that we're going to add later. So let's add text home, set an offset of x0, y minus 210. I'm also going to use a rotation effect, degrees minus 31. For this, the position and the rotation is all manually coded. Of course, you can come up with your own formula for something more dynamic, but for the purpose of this demo, it's all manual. Also, it's worth mentioning that any container can only have a maximum of 10 elements. So if I have more, let's say circles, you're going to see that I'm going to run into an issue. So to solve that, we can always nest element, meaning that we can group into more containers. Let me fix the indentation, and I'm going to duplicate this 6 more times. So here, feel free to use your own data, especially for the first 3 elements. So tent, park, car, 115 minus 170, 35, 80, 190, then degrees 150. Next, we're going to take care of the directions. So north, east, south, west. For the degrees, it's going to be 0, 90, 180, and 270. For the y, it's going to be minus 135, and then south, positive 135. Switch the values for east and west. So 135 for east, minus 135 for west. Finally, set 0, 0 for east and west for y. Now for all the values except for the first one, we need to put the rotation effect before the offset. And there you go, we have the proper positioning for the hidden elements. Next, we just need to add the colored circles for the waypoints next to the text. Scroll up to go to the body, and right after inner circles, we're going to add waypoints. And then we're going to create var waypoints of type SumView, curly braces, and start with a circle again. Set a fill that is blue, and then I'm going to set a frame using a width of 16, then offset x 100, y 210. Place the circle inside a Z-stack, and then we're going to create 2 more of these circles. So Command D twice, minus 120, minus 200, then 100, and then minus 150. Second is going to be red, and third is going to be green. Awesome. Now we have the hidden elements Awesome. Now we have created these hidden lines that are only visible when we drag using the flashlight, and we place these waypoints next to the text as well as the directions. In the next section, we're actually going to use core location to detect the compass direction as well as the latitude, longitude of the person using the phone. This is going to allow us to rotate the elements and also give the information about the compass direction inside a title. So I'll see you in the next section. In this section, we're going to learn how to use core location in order to detect the compass direction, but also if you press on this button, you're going to be able to get the location as long as you have the permission from the user. And so we're going to get the longitude and the latitude. Back in Xcode, we're going to create a new Swift file. It's going to be called Location Manager. Here we need to import core location. Then we'll set a class Location Manager of type NSObject, observable object, and CL Location Manager delegate, then curly braces. Now the first thing is to set let manager is equal to CL location manager parentheses. With this, we're going to have all the information from core location manager, which includes location, compass direction, and so forth. And then we're going to have to pick what information that we want. So the next step is to set publish. And in this case, we're interested in var degrees of type double is equal to 0 by default. And then we're going to set override init parentheses curly braces, and we'll configure super.init manager.delegate is equal to self, then manager.start updating heading, and manager.request when in use authorization. So start updating heading is where we're going to start generating the updates for the compass direction. Then request authorization is asking the user permission, so the alert that they're going to see, and we can then get information from the location data. All right, so we're going to start updating the degrees for the compass. We're going to set func location manager did update heading. So sometimes you might need to type all of the keywords to get the correct auto-completion, regardless if you finish typing one word or not. So in this case, I'm going to set location manager did update heading, and then degrees is equal to new heading dot true heading. Great, we can finally go back to compass view, and this is where we're going to set the location manager at observed object var location manager is equal to location manager parentheses. With this, we can finally get the compass direction. So we're going to set that inside a text. First of all, I'm going to set the component, so title, and then I'm going to declare var title of type some view. Then I'll set the text parentheses quote, and I'm going to use the variable, so / parentheses set location manager dot degrees. So we can barely see it right now. I'm going to make it white and move it to the top. First of all, I'm going to put this inside a VStack. Then I'll set the font to be large title, foreground color to white, and frame to use a max width infinity, max height infinity, alignment top. Now, in order to test the compass direction, you're going to need to set to your phone, meaning that you have to connect it via USB. And also, we're going to go to content view, and this is where we're going to set compass view instead of message view. Then we'll move to overlay message view. If you don't want the message to always appear, you can always go to message view, and instead of setting it as a state, we're going to set it as an app storage with the name show message. And there you go. If you test it on your phone and you move it, you're going to see that the numbers is changing based on the compass direction. So let's go back to compass view, and we're going to set the rest of the layout. And I also want to show you how to add a location button and detect the latitude and longitude. First, I'm going to do some text formatting because the number is too long. I don't want to have too many decimals. So to do that, I'm going to set string parentheses, and here I'm going to set the format to quotes %.0f, comma, and finish the parentheses. Let's finish with a degree sign. Then I'm going to set a text for San Francisco or whatever city you're from, and set this to uppercase with a font to .footnote. Then for both texts, I'm going to set a font weight to medium to make it more readable, especially for smaller text. For the direction, it would also be great to show north, east, south, etc. It's going to be a lot more readable. To do that, I'm going to set a function in Location Manager, func compass direction, parentheses. I'm going to get underscore if you don't want to set the variable name. You want to go straight to the value. And here I'm going to set degrees of type double, parentheses, return a string, curly braces. Let's set the array for the directions. So let directions is equal to an array, so square brackets. The first one is going to be north, then I'll paste the rest. Then we want to get an index value so that we can pick the right direction based on the degrees. Now we have a formula here. Let index is equal to, and then we have the degrees plus 22.5. Now all of this stuff is just to get the index value based on a formula so that we can pick the right one. At the end, we're going to return directions, then square brackets using the index value. With this function, we can return to compass view, and right after location manager, we're going to add right after the degree sign / parentheses, then compass direction using location manager .degrees. Awesome. Now you can see that the direction in a letter is appearing. So before we go, we're going to set the location button, and also we're going to detect the longitude, latitude. We're going to go to the location manager. Then we're going to add a few things, starting with publish var location of type CL location coordinate 2D, and this is going to be optional. Then inside init, I'm going to add manager dot start updating location. Then we'll create a function to request location. So func request location, parentheses, curly braces, manager dot request location. Finally, we'll update the location that we publish. So func location manager, and here we're going to set did update locations and set location is equal to locations dot first, and then optional coordinate. When you're working with location data such as longitude and latitude, which can potentially use as a way to detect the city and so on, you want to change your info.plis. And to do that, we're going to go to the project settings, and we're going to go to info for the target, and we're going to set a new element, and this is going to be called privacy dash location when usage description. And the string is going to be as descriptive as possible for the data that you want to use. In this case, I'm just going to say use longitude and latitude for Compass app. Then I'm going to go back to Compass view and go ahead and add the core location button. In order to use that pre-made button, we're going to need to import core location UI. Then going back to the title, this is where I'm going to add a location button, curly braces, and now we have a giant location button, and that's because we have the font size to be large title for everything. So I'm just going to move that to the title. And for the footnote, I'm going to use that for everything. For the action, I'm going to set location manager dot request location, which is the function that I just created earlier. And then I'm going to style my button a little bit by using label style. And here I can use title and icon or icon only, plus use a corner radius of 20 so that I get a circle instead. At this point, I want to show the longitude, latitude if the permission is granted. And if not, then it's going to show the button. So at this point, I'm going to set an optional binding, meaning that if my location data exists, then it's going to get me that variable. So if let my location is equal to location manager dot location curly braces, then else put that location button. Now we'll show the text. The first one is latitude, and I'm gonna set the variable my location dot latitude, comma, longitude, then variable my location dot longitude. This number is going to be long again, using a lot of decimals. So one way to format the number is to use dot formatted, and inside the parentheses, I'm going to set dot number dot precision dot fraction length and set it to 2. Now I'll do the same for the longitude. So dot formatted, inside parentheses, dot number dot precision dot fraction length set to 2. One final step is to make our UI rotate. So we're going to go at the very top and we're going to select the ones that we want to rotate. Starting with the waypoints, I'm going to set rotation effect dot degrees location manager dot degrees. Let's apply that to the stroke as well and the text inside the flashlight. So strokes and command click on flashlight. I'm gonna jump to the group specifically here and double click on the curly braces to get to the end and apply rotation effect. Awesome. Now if you test it in your phone, you're going to see the alert. Unfortunately here I don't see it, but on my phone I do see it. And if I allow that, it's going to show the longitude, latitude. Now we have the compass direction. When I move it, it rotates the different waypoints as well as the text, which is awesome. And that's how you use core location. So in the next section, we're going to take care of setting a custom sheet that is going to show from the bottom of the screen. So I'll see you in the next section. Today, we're going to build a custom sheet. And this is going to use a little bit of Markdown. And also, we're going to have our own gesture. And it's going to have the nice 3D animation in the background. So the custom sheet itself is pretty common in iOS. You can find that in Apple Maps and other apps like Music, Google, and a lot of modals actually come from the bottom and you dismiss it using the swipe down. Normally you use the half sheet, but in this case we're going to build everything custom because we have a custom interface and this allows us to learn a lot of new techniques. So let's get started. Back in Xcode, let's create a new SwiftUI file called custom sheet. Let's start with the text. It's going to be incline, and here I want to have a second line of text. Usually you want to set a second text element, but in this case you can actually use the non-breaking space, so /n with another text, so 20 degrees. So this is a good way to compose your text without having too many elements. Now what happens if you want to set a custom style for each of these texts? So what you can do here is to move the text to another text element by using a plus sign. So I'm going to paste, and there you go. It does exactly the same thing. And on the first one, I can set a font to caption. Keep in mind that some of the Markdown syntax actually works in the text. So for example, a star on both sides is going to give italic, and then double is going to give bold, The tilde is going to give strike through. Then the backtick is going to give monospace. Finally, you can use the link. So we need to set the square brackets and parentheses afterwards using a link to, let's say, Apple. And now I can click on it and it's going to open Safari, but you have to be using a simulator or on your device. Okay, let me put it back, and I'm going to have more text element, but first I'm going to put that inside a VStack. Let me just paste because we have exactly the same content structure. You just need to change the title and the text. And there we go. We're going to set the alignment to the VStack to leading, and the content, we're going to replace that with spacing of 30. Awesome. So you can see that with this, we saved a lot of stacks. In fact, if you want to have spacing between these stacks of text, usually you need to have an extra VStack or HStack, depending on the direction that you want for your text. And so this is a lot cleaner. And of course, it's a lot more powerful if you want to do more customizations with different texts and markdown. Next, I'm going to push everything to the top by using a spacer. Also, I'm going to set the font weight to medium for all text and push everything to the left by using max width, infinity, alignment, leading. In the future, I'm going to have 2 columns of text, so I might as well put everything inside a Z stack for now. And also on that Z stack, I'm going to set a padding of 40. Then I'm going to set an arrow right before the spacer. So arrow, and set the component for it, var arrow of type sum view, set the image, arrow. Next, we're going to set a Z stack first because we're going to set more circles. So right before the image, I'm going to set circle, and it's going to use a stroke border using a color that is primary, opacity 0.4, then style, stroke style, parentheses, set the line width to 5 with a dash of an array of 1, 2. Let's duplicate this using Command D and using a line width of 15 with 1 and 60. Then I'm going to set the frame to have a width of 93 and a height of 93 as well. Next, we'll set the sheet to be dark theme. So I'm going to set a background using .black.opacity 0.5. And also I'm going to use a background using ultra thin material. So instead of having the material alone, you can combine it with a color, also with blend mode, which is optional, to give it more contrast or towards the color that you want. Because this is a custom sheet, we're going to need to add the drag indicator. I'm going to use overlay for that. Then set a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 10, fill .white, opacity 0.2, frame width 40, height 5. Then we'll put it to the top by using a frame max height .infinity alignment top. Let me move it down a little bit by using offset using Y10. Next, we're going to set the border. So overlay again, rounded rectangle, corner radius 50. Then stroke border using a linear gradient this time. So dot linear gradient using colors. And for the first color, I'm going to set dot white, opacity 0.2, then clear, top leading, bottom trailing. Finally, we can set the whole thing to dark using preferred color scheme. We're going to do the rest of the details later, but for now we're going to go back to compass view, and then at the very top we're going to set a new state. So state var show is equal to false by default. Later, I'm going to have a button, but for now, I'm going to set a tap gesture on the whole screen. So using tap gesture right before the gesture drag. And here, I'm going to set with animation, then use show.toggle. Now we're going to add the sheet. So let's create sheet as well as the component for our sheet of type sum view. And in that, we're going to call the custom sheet using offset, and we're going to play with the Y position, show question mark 340, otherwise 1000. Awesome. If you test this, you're going to see that when you tap on the whole thing, it's going to show the custom sheet and it's going to toggle. The rest, we just need to set the 3D transformation on the background layers. So let's scroll at the very top. I'm going to start with the outer circle, then set rotation 3D effect using degrees show question mark 26, otherwise 0. And for the axes, I'm going to set 1 for the X, 0 for the Y, and then 0 for the Z. Really nice. So we just need to apply the same thing, but using different degrees to create some sort of a parallax effect. Now I'm going to copy this rotation 3D effect and put it on inner circles. And this time I'm going to set to 15. For the circle label, do the same and set this one to 10. And for the strokes, I'm going to set it to 10 as well. And finally, we just need to align the waypoints correctly, and this time we can use a scale. So let's start with the waypoint. I'm going to use scale effect, show question mark 0.9, otherwise 1. Let's see if this works well. It's great. Then I want to apply the scale effect also to the other circles, but only to the first and the second. Now here, I already have 1.2. I'm going to set show question mark 1.5, otherwise 1.2. And the second one, show question mark 2, otherwise 1.5. And we have a pretty good effect right here. Now, one final detail is that we don't really want to show the flashlight, otherwise it's not aligned anymore. So what we can do is to disable the flashlight when we show the sheet. So I'm going to go to the flashlight at the very top, and here I'm going to set if not show, then curly braces flashlight. Really cool. So you can see that this is how you create a custom sheet. You can use Markdown and compose your text elements. And so in the next section, we're going to add the buttons and a really cool radial button animation. So I'll see you in the next section.